Welcome, my beautiful people, to another episode from the Dino Basics. My name is Logan, and it is safe to say there are a few pieces of information that have become ubiquitous when simply saying the word dinosaur. They lived a really long time ago, birds are their later descendants, Tyrannosaurus was really scary, Velociraptor was really smart, and Stegosaurus could get it. You know, stuff everyone knows. One fact that always comes up from these conversations is their dramatic end, brought on by an asteroid crashing into Earth and bringing about their extinction. But often when this point is discussed, that's all that is really mentioned. There was a big space rock, it hit the Earth, and no more dinosaurs. This simple explanation leaves a lot of nuance out there that really should be addressed. What was the world like in the final days of the dinosaurs? How well were the dinosaurs even doing? What was the impact like? And what, if anything, could possibly survive such a devastating extinction? But before any of that, background. The first illustrations of dinosaurs date back to 1677, owed to English naturalist Robert Plot, who had recovered a fossilized femur of unknown origins. Importantly, these fossils were not understood as remnants of ancient beasts like dinosaurs. Plot believed they could be fossilized bones from only a few hundred years ago, stemming from the Roman Empire, possibly a horse or an elephant. Or even more extravagantly, he suggested they could be the remains of long-lost giants. Historically speaking, this was not unusual. Many dinosaur fossil discoveries from around this time were believed to be of mythical or fantastical creatures from legend. And scientific concepts like extinction or even the term dinosaur would not be defined for another 100 years or so. Eventually, in 1842, English paleontologist Richard Owen would author a paper formally recognizing the Dinosauria grouping, to include the Megalosaurus, a carnivorous theropod which would become a muddled mess of other medium-sized theropods for the next 100 years, Iguanodon, a bulky herbivore and close relative to the duck-billed hadrosaurs, and Hylaeosaurus, a tough-skinned ankylosaur that has remained somewhat mysterious even to this day. This formal description would recontextualize dinosaurs as not mythical creatures of folklore, but instead an ancient grouping of animals that roamed the earth millions of years ago, but had since gone long extinct. Despite a better understanding of these creatures, for the next decade and a half or so, understanding why this extinction occurred was a fairly lacking area of study. Various hypotheses and suggestions were proposed, but none had the general support of the scientific community. One commonly argued theory was that climate change, either a global cooling bringing on an ice age or dramatically rising temperatures resulting in a dust bowl, would result in the destruction of the ecosystems these creatures would rely on and lead to their eventual extinction. An example of this theory's popularity is its portrayal in the 1940 film Fantasia, where Master of Ceremonies Deems Taylor would explain dinosaurs went extinct due to a dust bowl drying out the planet and killing them off. However, this theory has since been debunked for a few reasons. For one, fossil records indicate the extinction of dinosaurs was a fairly sudden event, occurring in only a few years, rather than the hundreds or even thousands of years that would be required for natural global temperature changes to significantly impact the dinosaurs and other large forms of life. Furthermore, we now understand dinosaurs as being much more resistant to environmental conditions than originally believed. The early 19th century considered dinosaurs to be low-intelligent, cold-blooded brutes that would be extremely susceptible to cold or warm temperatures. These factors would result in dinosaurs being weakened by their slower metabolisms and unable to adapt over time, resulting in their eventual end. But we now understand dinosaurs were likely high-functioning and warm-blooded, with even some evidence suggesting that they could survive in dried-out deserts and cold Arctic ecosystems. Volcanic activity was another believed hypothesis, and this theory has a culprit to point to. Analysis of the Deccan traps, a large igneous province located in west-central India, shows that some amount of volcanic activity likely occurred for hundreds of thousands of years around the time of the dinosaur extinction event, between 66.3 and 65.6 million years ago, making it an obvious suspect for having some effect on the extinction of dinosaurs. However, much like the climate change theory, many criticize that a volcanic event would likely take thousands of years to meaningfully impact a group as widespread as the dinosaurs. While the smoke and lava would have an immediate effect on the area around these volcanoes, even for a massive eruption event, it could take weeks, months, or even years for environments farther away from the epicenter to feel any side effects. This also leads into another point of criticism for this theory. The End-Cretaceous Extinction was a global extinction event, and while volcanic events can have considerable areas of effect, it is unlikely it could be wide enough to impact the entire world, land and sea, for anywhere near long enough to meaningfully impact ecosystems. And these are only some of the better supported theories. Dozens of others were proposed throughout the 1800s and 1900s, such as dinosaurs being outcompeted by mammals, an epidemic sweeping through ecosystems, or even a supernova causing intense spikes in radiation to kill off these bigger dinosaurs. My point is, the scientific community, despite knowing what dinosaurs were, didn't have a clear idea of why they aren't here anymore. That would be until 1980. When Nobel Prize-winning scientists Luis Alvarez and his son Walter Alvarez, while studying the sedimentary layer of rock and clay around the time dinosaurs went extinct, would notice a high concentration of iridium in the stone, hundreds of times greater than expected. Iridium, a very dense metal and element on the periodic table, rarely appears in the Earth's crust due to its dense nature and tendency to bind to iron, often sinking into the Earth's core. However, it is much more abundant throughout asteroids, which would vaporize upon impact with the Earth's surface and spread across the globe, thus leading Alvarez Jr. and Sr. to suggest an asteroid had brought on the Cretaceous extinction. Scientific publications, some as early as 1953, had suggested an asteroid impact as an event significant enough to kill off the dinosaurs, but lacked much strong evidence, and was largely limited to speculation. But the Alvarez's iridium discovery had just found the smoking gun to blow this case wide open. But an unsuspecting coast just off of Mexico would be the bullet hole. In 1981, scientists Glenn Penfield and Antonio Camargo would release a geological survey of the Yucatan Peninsula, an area of land bordering the Gulf of insert appropriate name here, in southern Mexico. This survey, commissioned by oil company Pemex, highlighted a large crater in the region that could be the point of impact scientists were looking for. While overlooked at the time, this report would be expanded upon in 1991, identifying the Chicxulub crater as the likely impact site for the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Measuring nearly 190 miles or 300 kilometers wide, this crater, alongside the iridium findings of the Alvarezes, would provide enough credible evidence for the asteroid theory to become the leading hypothesis on what happened during the Cretaceous 66 million years ago. With all that out of the way, let's actually talk about what likely happened. Early estimates believe the extinction occurred about 65 million years ago. More precisely, about 65.55 million years ago. But as dating techniques and measuring tools have improved, later estimates place the extinction closer to about 66.04 million years ago. Around this time, Earth was a much warmer and more tropical place than it is today. Tropical environments likely extended as far north as what is now modern Canada and Siberia, and the poles likely had little to no permanent ice, although certain regions would experience colder temperatures seasonally. A common misconception around life during this time is that dinosaurs were in a decline leading up to their extinction, seeing less diversity and lower populations for the genus that did exist. This is often referred to as the 3-meter gap, which, if the name were not obvious, references about 3 meters of sediment before the likely extinction event, where dinosaur remains were noticeably lacking, leading some to suggest that dinosaurs may have already been in decline before the asteroid collision. However, this hypothesis has since been almost completely debunked, with many noting how the phenomenon is almost completely limited to the Hell's Creek Formation. And since its original creation in the 1980s, additional remains have been found in this time frame, disproving the notion dinosaurs were actually in any notable decline. If we were to look at what dinosaurs would call this time period home, it seemed these creatures were quite diverse, matching even their heights during the Jurassic. The most successful herbivores during this era were the hadrosaurs, a grouping of duck-billed grazers that would first appear around the early Cretaceous, around 130 million years ago. Edmontosaurus was an excellent example of this. Measuring nearly 40 feet or 12 meters in length and sporting hundreds of flattened teeth, this creature was an extremely efficient grazer, able to process incredible quantities of low-lying plants to sustain themselves. Alongside these behemoths, more heavily armed herbivores like the ceratopsids, including the three-horned triceratops, and the heavily armored ankylosaurs, including the ankylosaurus, were quite common across the northern hemisphere, more than ready to take on the enormous predators that prowled this ancient world. Further south, the long-necked sauropods had continued to thrive, and had diversified into some of the largest terrestrial animals to ever walk the planet, called titanosaurs. One such member, the Argentinosaurus, was believed to have reached lengths of between 90 to 115 feet, or about 30 to 38 meters, and weigh nearly 80 tons, comparable to about 10 male African elephants. To compete in such a world, predators like the Tyrannosaurus rex would have to grow to giant sizes themselves, reaching nearly 40 feet or about 13 meters in length and weighing up to 10 tons, becoming one of the largest terrestrial predators to ever roam the Earth. Aside from their incredible size, Tyrannosaurus and other tyrannosaurs would rely on bone-crushing strength to overpower their victims, sporting some of the strongest jaws in our Earth's history. Alongside T-Rex, smaller predators like the Dakotaraptor would specialize in hunting smaller prey, relying on their keen senses and sickle-shaped claws to outmaneuver their victims and deliver a single devastating blow. But dinosaurs were not the only creatures to inhabit this prehistoric world. Pterosaurs, after first appearing in the Triassic nearly 230 million years ago, had pioneered the ability to fly for vertebrates, and by the late Cretaceous had mastered the skill. The Quetzalcoatlus, for example, was an excellent glider and could sport a wingspan of nearly 36 feet, or about 12 meters, and would stand upright at about 20 feet, or around 6 meters, comparable to modern giraffes. It is today recognized as one of the largest flying animals to ever live. And with its nearly 8-foot or 3-meter long beak, it was a formidable adversary for even dinosaurs to contend with. Beneath the depths, oceanic reptiles had grown to incredible sizes and developed amazing adaptations to specialize in their aquatic homes. One of the most iconic would obviously be the Mosasaurus. Measuring nearly 56 feet or about 17 meters in length, its silhouette continues to strike fear even today, with its enormous jaws able to crush the bodies of any prey it chooses to hunt. But not all ocean creatures were so bone-chilling. The plesiosaurs, like the 46-foot or 14-meter long Elasmosaurus, would glide through the deep oceans, wielding an extended neck to better reach and grab fish to feast on. But of course, these larger reptiles and dinosaurs were not the only animals to inhabit the continents. Mammals had continued to live in the shadows of these titans. However, few would grow any larger than rats or even possums. One of the largest, the badger-like Rapenomamus, would only reach lengths of a few feet and weigh no more than 15 pounds. Mammals during this time were nowhere near as dominant as they are today, and would largely hide among the trees or in underground burrows to avoid predators, only emerging to hunt small insects, reptiles, and possibly even dinosaur young. If only there were, say, some world-ending event that would completely overturn the natural order of the planet and open an ecological niche for mammals to evolve into the dominant form of life on Earth. So, around this time, a giant space rock was hurtling towards our planet. Estimates believe the asteroid would have measured about 7.5 miles, or nearly 12 kilometers in diameter, and wield a mass of nearly 1 to 3 trillion tons. With the asteroid likely speeding towards Earth at about 45,000 miles per hour, the ramifications of its collision would be devastating. And when it hit, the effects could be felt around the globe. The energy released from its impact was likely equal to about 100 million megatons of TNT, equivalent to over 1 billion little boy bombs, the nuclear weapon dropped on Hiroshima, although some more recent estimates place the power closer to about 1 billion megatons of TNT. For those closest to the impact, survival was essentially impossible. All forms of life, dinosaurs, reptiles, and mammals alike, would have been instantly vaporized within the blast zone of around 120 miles or 200 kilometers. But outside this zone, the effects would have still been devastating. Shockwaves would have created powerful earthquakes and generated tsunamis thousands of feet high, crushing coastlines and disturbing the fragile ocean ecosystems. Debris from the impact would be shot out of the Earth's atmosphere, and upon re-entry, would generate enormous amounts of intense infrared radiation. Scientists debate how widespread this debris would actually be, but for the areas it would occur in, temperatures of exposed areas could rise to nearly 600 degrees Fahrenheit, literally boiling the large inhabitants of these ecosystems. For those not literally boiled alive by the sky, wildfires would spread across the landscape, incinerating Cretaceous forests. The largest inhabitants of the Earth would be hit the hardest by these immediate effects. Their large size, once a key advantage to protect themselves from threats, ironically left them the most susceptible to this heat and intense environmental forces. These larger creatures would also be the first to feel the loss to the food chain, with herbivores struggling to find enough vegetation to sustain themselves, while carnivores would quickly starve from the lack of large prey to hunt. Titanosaurs, large pterosaurs, and larger marine life would certainly be the first to die off within the first few days or weeks from the impact, with many large carnivores and medium-sized herbivores like the ceratopsids quick to follow, crumbling under the immediate strain on ecosystems. While there's no direct evidence, many scientists believe some smaller dinosaurs, like the Maniraptorans, including Dromaeosaurus or Dakotaraptor, could have survived beyond the first few weeks, especially those living farthest from the impact. But unfortunately for them, the effects of this impact were not limited to immediate ones. Millions of tons of dust, hydrocarbons, and sulfur would be ejected into the atmosphere, accumulating into large clouds that would block out the sun. Models based on the Hell's Creek Formation estimate global darkness would have reached its maximum in only a few weeks, and may have lasted for almost 2 years. During this time, temperatures would drop to freezing conditions on land and on the ocean's surface. Chemicals in these clouds would result in acid rain, killing off a majority of plant life and causing oceans to acidify. For regions that were able to survive the initial impact, this prolonged winter would only worsen conditions and seal the fate of much of the life that defined this era. Estimates believe 75% of all species would go extinct during this event. It is often considered the second worst extinction in our Earth's history, behind the Permian-Triassic extinction in terms of species loss. But estimates vary. Dinosaurs were the most obvious loss, and possibly the hardest hit. Fossil records show no non-avian dinosaurs survived past this extinction, with any surviving dinosaurs likely dying off only days to just weeks after the event. The most obvious reason for this extinction, aside from their larger bodies of many dinosaurs from around this time, was their metabolisms. Their warm-blooded bodies, mixed with their general larger size, would mean dinosaurs would need a considerable amount of food to sustain themselves. And as food chains collapsed, first with plants, then to herbivores, and eventually carnivores, even smaller dinosaurs would struggle to find enough food and would likely starve if the intense heat and cold hadn't already cooked or frozen them. Pterosaurs and large marine life would die off for similar reasons, unable to fuel their warm-blooded bodies in these crippled environments. Plains would also take a noticeable hit, with some areas, like modern-day North America, seeing species drop as harsh as 57%, with many ferns and flowering plants suffering under the colder conditions, acid rain, and lack of sunlight. Naturally, many plants that do not rely on photosynthesis, like fungi or mold, would flourish in the subsequent years after this event. But as these enormous dust clouds dissipated, about 3 years after the event, ferns and flowering plants would quickly reclaim their spots in ecosystems and see a renewed explosion in diversification and distribution. So, who actually survived this event? Well, some reptiles actually recovered quite well following this impact. While the colder temperatures would have caused these cold-blooded creatures to struggle at times, many scientists believe their slower metabolisms may have actually benefited them as food became more scarce. Furthermore, their generally smaller size and semi-aquatic or burrowing lifestyles likely provided them with better protection from the harsh elements, giving them shelter from the intense pulses of heat and allowing them to remain inactive during the colder times of the year. It is also noted that fossil evidence shows freshwater ecosystems were not as harshly hit by the extinction than ocean environments, likely explaining why many marine reptiles would suffer so much more. Small to medium-sized crocodilomorphs, which include modern-day alligators and crocodiles, as well as many species of turtles, are known to have survived the extinction, and even exceeded their pre-extinction levels in the following years. The Choristodires, a grouping of semi-aquatic creatures which include the Gario-like Champsosaurus, or the flat-headed Simoedosaurus, also survived the extinction event, but would decline and eventually disappear moving into the Miocene. Another grouping of animals that would flourish post-impact were the mammals. While some groups would take a significant hit, many mammal groups would survive the extinction, owed largely to their small size, allowing them to take shelter from the harsh elements. It is also believed many mammals around the time of the extinction were semi-aquatic or burrowing, providing further safety from the fallout. Another factor that likely benefited these mammals would be their more varied diets. While larger dinosaurs likely specialized on specific prey or vegetation, it is believed many mammalian creatures would be much more opportunistic, eating everything from seeds, fungi, insects, and the well-done bodies of the dinosaurs that once oppressed them. Mammals would become one of the first to fill the niches left open by the dinosaurs, although most research indicates that this diversification may not have been immediate. The earliest to diversify would be the Chiroptera, which include many modern-day bats. The Cetartidodactyla, which are often split into the Artiodactyla, comprised of cows, camels, and deer, among others, as well as the Cetacea, which include many aquatic mammals like baleen and toothed whales. Another one of the earliest groupings were the marsupials, which include many pouch-bearing creatures like the koala and kangaroo. While diversification may have been somewhat slow, scientists note a clear shift in size for mammals during this time. Only about 700,000 years after the extinction, some mammals had reached nearly 110 pounds in weight, a nearly 100-fold increase over those that survived the extinction event. But as many of you have probably caught on to, there is one group I have not yet mentioned. Well, yeah, but bugs are boring and they're never going anywhere. While the terrestrial dinosaurs had suffered from this extinction, a small grouping of avian dinosaurs, often referred to as aves, would survive the extinction. The exact reason is often debated, but many believe it is owed to a mix of their small size, their ability to dive and swim, as well as their preference to burrow and nest in sheltered areas, like underground dens or trees. While the aves would be hit hard by this extinction, the lack of predators and open niche space following the event allowed birds to diversify rapidly, with some even following in the footsteps of their ancestors and developing flightlessness to take on enormous terrestrial sizes, namely the ratites, which include ostriches and emus. Some of these giant birds, such as the Phorusrhacidae family, more simply referred to as terror birds, would seek to compete with mammals for dominance on land, but their efforts would ultimately be in vain, and a new age, the Age of Mammals, would take over in place of the Mesozoic reptiles. From an outsider's perspective, such extinction events are a sad story to tell. It is heartbreaking to hear of the beautiful and majestic creatures that once were. But for those who survive it, this provides an opportunity to redefine our Earth's history, and those who eventually live to tell it. While the wondrous marine reptiles, soaring pterosaurs, and majestic dinosaurs are a devastating loss, their absence paved the way for the Choristideers, that went extinct shortly after anyways, the beautiful birds that fly into our windows at random times of the day, and of course, people like me, who just ate up 20 minutes of your life that you'll never get back. I promise these extinctions sometimes have upsides. It can be hard to let go of what was before, but sometimes all it takes is looking at what you have now to make it all worth it. That's gonna do for this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Consider this a kind of sequel to the Tithonian extinction. Let me know if there are any other extinctions you would still want to hear about on the channel. There's still like 4 others in the big 5 I haven't touched, so odds are it'll be one of those. But next week we are back to the Dino Basics, as we explore the basics on the Jurassic Titan not often talked about. It's the Asian Allosaurus rival, Yangzhuanosaurus. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next video.